Well, welcome to the first edition of the TheCleggCast. My next guest, he's the managing director and principal of a real estate company in South Perth. He's got 40 years' experience in the real estate industry, regarded as a knowledgeable, professional agent. He has sound principles to all aspects of life. He's a highly regarded member of the community. A long history of supporting many charitable causes, supporting organisations. He also volunteers his time to many people in the industry. He's been a guest on 6PR Radio, offers a lot of real estate advice off his own bat when people need it. He's credited with more sales and management along Canning Highway in the city of South Perth. He's also competed in triathlons and the Rottnest Swim on 24 occasions in July 2000. He also led a team of 6 West Australians across the English Channel in an Australian record time. Simmon, Sardelic, welcome to the TheCleggCast.
Gee, how are you? It's good to be here.
Mate, it's a pleasure to have you. That's a pretty impressive list there. Do you actually ever get time to sit down and breathe just for a minute? Or?
Well, most of it, if you look at it, it goes back a few years.
Yep.
But we have added to it over the years to make sure the numbers are pretty right. But
yeah,
when you do these things, you reflect back on some of the achievements and you think, wow, that certainly took some time and effort at the time to prepare for it. But pretty proud of most of them, yeah.
Yeah, you should be. Tell me what it was like, the English Channel. That would have been amazing.
Well, it's probably not the smartest thing I've ever done, given how cold it was.
Yeah.
But it was more about the mental and physical journey before it, because we'd actually planned to do a double crossing, which means you're going to be in the water for 24 hours. So unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the weather didn't allow us to do the second crossing. So we got one way from England to France. But to do that, you've got to acclimatise your body to swimming at night, pitch black.
Yep.
The rules over there are a lot more stringent than they are here, but they're also pretty cruel in the sense that you can't have a support paddler. You've got no lights, you've got nothing. You've just got your main support boat, which can be only stays on the route that's locked into, and as a swimmer, you have to actually try and stay near that, which is really, really difficult. So at times we would often be 50, 100 metres away from the support boat, which is pretty daunting when you're in a swell that can get up. At one point it was probably 3.8 metres high. So
wow.
Yeah, it was trying, but as I said, the lead up to it was pretty much two winters, because it takes that long to acclimatise your body to the cold and the darkness. But we're ready for it. Had the conditions been more favourable, we would have certainly got across there and back in an Australian record time. We got a record time for the one way. But by the time we got there, it was, the boat was smashed up and
wow.
We'd had enough.
Yeah. So compare the English Channel to the Rottnest Swim. Did it seem like a walk in the park after you'd done? Yeah, it would have. Yeah.
Well, I had done...
Wouldn't be for me, but it obviously is for you.
I'd completed probably 2 or 3 Rottnest swims before we did the channel. And 2 of those were in teams and then the rest were duos. So, but because of the conditions in Perth, it's just, it's just a day out, beautiful weather, warm water. It's just a party atmosphere. Even in a duo, which is a bit more serious than a team of 4 or a solo. But I never did a solo, which one could easily say, well, that's the only thing you haven't ticked off the bucket list. But I know I could do that. I could probably jump in tomorrow and do one if the conditions are right. So that's not enough for me to warrant doing it, So, So I've done 22 duos, 2 teams, and plus England. Was enough, but no real comparison in the sense that you're in the water for a lot longer and a lot colder. So the acclimatisation to the cold, to give you an example, you have to. We sat motionless in the coldest water we could find, which was a place called the Wollongong Dam, which is up in Mundaring somewhere, and it was 11.5 degrees, and you got to sit in there for an hour and acclimatise to that without moving, basically.
Yep.
And if you can do that, you're on the way to getting somewhere near acclimatised for the English Channel. And the other thing we did, which was critical, was hypnotherapy to overcome it.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. That's probably for another podcast. Yeah, that was pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. Take us through a typical day of your life, mate. We know that you keep busy all the time. How does it start for you?
Much to my fiance's dismay, the alarm goes off at 4:40.
Yep.
And that's just because I'm acclimatised and routined to that. I'm now looking at changing it because of a pool closure down at Freo, which I'll shift it around and probably go a bit later. But it just always has been. So it's been pretty much that for the last 30 years. 5 days a week. I don't train on Saturdays and Sundays. So, and the alarm's off at that time because I'm then in the water, an hour later.
Mm.
Then do my morning routine which is anywhere from 3 days a week. I'll do 3.5 to 4 Ks in the pool, and then 2 days I'll do sprint training.
Wow.
Which is another 2K sessions each day. So I've just scaled it back to about 10, 11 Ks a week from about 16 because for the first time in my life, I've got a personal trainer and I'm doing some weight training and stuff like that because they say as you get older, that's probably something that you can avoid, osteo issues with if you do some weight bearing training and stuff. So,
yeah.
But the personal trainer thinks it's just the easiest job he's ever had because I've sort of got the swimmer's sort of shoulders and the back.
Yep.
And then he's just got to build the rest around it.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be that hard. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that.
That's great. Great, mate.
Mm.
Mate, we're going to cover a lot of your life today in your journey, which I'm really excited about. We did have lunch at the Windsor Hotel, and that was a good lunch, by the way. It was just a quick one. We all had to work. But you told me some great stories, and I'm looking forward to covering that. But I just want to kick off and go back to the start, if I can, and talk about your family, your upbringing, but also about your father as well.
Sure.
That's very interesting. And for the viewers, I mean, this is a great book. This is The Destiny in the Sands about Sardelic, your father. I must confess, I'm trying to get through it and I will finish it. But from what I've seen, it's very interesting. And if I can just make some quick quotes about it, and you had a part to play in this, of course, but the book, Destiny of the Sands, your father went from poverty to war in Croatia, life as a refugee. When he arrived in Australia, he faced some terrible discrimination, resentment, but it drove him to succeed. He then ultimately found happiness as he accomplished the Australian dream. So over to you, mate. Please look forward to hearing the story.
Sure. Firstly, I'll quantify it by saying my father's journey is not unlike many, many others. And Perth in particular and Fremantle in particular, and Osborne Park and other parts of the state are filled with small Croatian communities or families that pretty much did the same journey. There were some hardships in Dad's case because there was a war that had broken out at the time. He, at the age of 11 or 12, had to stop all forms of education. He was a bigger looking kid and looked older than his age. So the Germans actually were hunting for young adults that they could convert, or young boys I should say, that they could convert into the German army. So he and the age they had to be was 14 or 15, which he looked at that age. So they picked him off and a few of his mates and said, yeah, you're coming with us. Fortunately, they got away, despite being shot at and all this sort of stuff, and actually hid in the mountains. 4 or 5 of his school friends got shot by the Germans because they were hiding down a well, and so my father witnessed that, which is terrible to be seeing at that sort of age.
Oh yeah.
So it's not uncommon for a lot of the homes in the village to be bombed. So they had no house, and we've actually been back in 2008 and visited the site, which was just a house that was made out of rock, if you like, by stonemasons sort of put together. So we could see the basics of it, but it was pretty much in ruins. So they left with pillowcases filled with their belongings.
Wow.
So the clothes on their back, minimal stuff they could carry. They left his grandmother in the corner who was too old to walk, so they left her to die.
Oh, God.
He became the head of the family at 12 and guided his mum, his little sister and his little brother down to the foreshore where they were allocating who was going to get on a rowboat, and then they had to row to Italy from where they were. I can't remember the name of the town.
Yeah.
And they had to do that in the middle of night so that they wouldn't be spotted and shot by the Germans.
Wow.
And that was their pathway to get to a place where they then put them all into refugee camps, and it was a place called Port Said in Egypt, where I think there was 22,000 refugees housed there for a couple of years. So it's probably a bit longer. Actually, Dad was there till he was about 15, 16.
Yeah.
He was educated as much as they could. They had some basic schooling, but they had no facilities. So he learnt the small part of English that he knew by using a stick in the sand, in the desert sand. And he was then given the choice of, in a hypothetical question and answer thing, is where would you like to go? And he said, I'd like to go to Australia, knowing that his father had actually already left. Sorry, I'll just digress. Going back to prior to the war hitting, his father had made the decision to come to Australia to set up a better life for them, which was going to take 6 or 12 months to earn enough to send the fares over for the family to come. So the father had come the year before. Then the village got bombed, and so they lost all communication. So the father was in a place called Wandowie or Northam, where he was working, and then the war hit, so he didn't know whether they were dead or alive for a number of years. Then communication somehow through the Red Cross, I'm a bit hazy on the details of it, was that they were still alive, and they were going to do everything they could to get back. Anyway, this fast forwarded 7 years to when, by the time they actually got out of the refugee camp, got the boat, missed the port of Fremantle because they, in some confusion, finished up in South Australia, and then finally got a job there to earn enough money to get on the train to get back to Western Australia. And then by this stage, Dad was 17 or 18, and that was the next time he saw his father from when he left when he was 11. But one of the interesting things, and I asked him, and I'll get to how the book came about, was because the relationship with my father and I was unusual, to say the least. Being brought up in a European family is different to any other.
Yep.
Particularly given the circumstances that my father had no parenting skills, zero, in fact. So by the time he'd re-met his father at 17, he was an adult, but missed all those formative years. So he never had the skills to pass on because we had no learning techniques. There's no internet. There's no books. There was no nothing.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So, but it took me many, many years to work that out. And it wasn't until Dad was 65 and I was in my mid-30s that I worked it out that I need to understand why he was so hard.
Yep.
And why he parented like he did. Mum, to a lesser degree, had been treated the same way by her parents, and so had lacked a lot of the skills as well. So, and one of the questions I asked is, I said, well, when your father decided to come to Australia, did you sit around a table like this and say, listen, I've got an opportunity, like we would discuss it today, and, we're going to go and move to another country, we're going to go for a while and see what it's like, and then you're going to come later. But there was no discussion. It wasn't mentioned. And I said, do you remember that last day? I wanted to know that.
Yeah.
And he said he turned around and looked and just went like that. And that was it. And that was the last time he saw his dad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That would have been very emotional, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we spoke at lunch, I hope I got this right. you asked your father 60 questions or something.
65.
65, yeah.
Mm.
And that's what led to this book.
Yeah.
And that's when you felt like you really did start to get to know him, didn't you? You felt like, that's what you were saying. You really started to understand him.
Yeah, it wasn't until after that he'd written it. It took him 10 years to write it as well.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until he was in his 70s that it actually started to make sense.
Mm.
And I gave advice to someone very recently about doing something similar, which can be done a lot easier these days than the way we did it. But you have to understand the problem to be able to have the answers. And he wasn't capable of doing that. So he was just this rock-like bull that treated everyone in life pretty much like that.
Right.
And it was about hard work and success, and nothing else mattered.
Right.
And if anything got in your way, you bumped them out. So,
wow. It's hard.
and that's how he parented. And to be honest, I didn't know any different. And, my early years as a parent, not as hard as his, but I just left it all to my wife at the time. And she, touch wood, she did a fantastic job.
Yes.
I came back in a bit later once I'd started to work it out. But, it's a bit of a trap for any young family. It's all about communication. And because in those days, communication wasn't part of it. So the 65 questions worked out it was basically a question for every year of his life. So I could work out what made him tick. And then once I did that, then our relationship started to change. And what caused it was that because basically we were like two bulls that would just hit each other in a business sense, because we were involved in business together. And
so you worked with your father for him for a while?
When I first set up my real estate office, because I was so headstrong and didn't want to listen to anyone else, didn't want to listen to any advice, I pretty much ran it into the ground within the first 2 years.
Okay.
And he came in and bailed us out.
Right.
And financially and advice and all the rest of it, which I'm eternally grateful for. But then as we started to grow a little bit, we would clash, in his business views and my business views. In hindsight, he was probably always right, but at the time I couldn't see that. And this particular time we'd had a terrible argument, and I was going to punch him. That was the only thing that was left.
Wow.
Which I didn't, but when I left, and I shut the door, walked out, and backhanded the wall as I walked out, and broke the bone in my hand, and I've still got the lump there, which could have been his head, and that was probably the turning point where I thought, I've gone so close to hitting the person that I love the most.
Yeah.
And thankfully I didn't, and that was what made me work out a way, without going to psychologists and mediators and all that, where I just thought, well, there's got to be a better way. And I think it's taught me that sometimes you get, as particularly as we get older, you get really good at looking outside the box.
Yep.
And think there's got to be another way.
Yep.
And that's become one of my specialties later in life. And not whether he knew he was teaching me that skill or not, I don't know. But he had the same skill. I found out much later.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And he was successful in business, though, wasn't he?
Enormously.
Around Perth.
Enormously.
Yeah. What can you tell us some of the things that he achieved and that sort of stuff?
Yeah. He got involved in hotels towards the latter part of his career. The refurbishment and development of them. Earlier on, he was basically a market gardener, or his family had started in that. So he had become a fruit and veg supplier, starting in Northam and then going through the different pathways to get to. He built up a chain of 40-odd stores throughout Perth, which in hindsight, we look back at it now, and one in particular was one at Canning Bridge where the IGA is.
Oh, right, yeah.
And where the bottle shop is was actually one of Dad's very first shops.
Okay.
And he approached the retailer at the time, which was, an operation was sort of like 10% of what IGA is now, where they were just selling the basic household products like milk, bread, sugar, and so on.
All those things, yep.
And he went to them and said, listen, you guys don't do fruit and veggies, but we do. Can we lease the space next door, which is the bottle shop, and we'll fit it out, and then the customers come and they buy veggies in one side and all the other household stuff in the other. And they did. And the relationship worked for many, many years and became very, very successful.
Yeah.
So that was the first introduction to IGA in the 60s, if you like.
Okay.
And it's hugely successful
It's
now.
like a pioneer, really, of it.
The idea was.
Yeah.
And
proud of that.
yeah, so he kicked that around for probably 10 or 12 years and then got into property development and was very successful in that because the market was very good. And he was the guy that would do the deals. He was the deal maker. Not that he was ever a real estate agent, but he was a developer. So he would go and buy the land and negotiate things, and that was one of the skills that I actually picked up. Of course,
the apple doesn't fall far from the tree in that regard. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, so I became naturally fairly good at that, and I would always run stuff past him. Towards the end, it was probably more to, keep the communication going, but. Yeah. The wisdom that you can get out of those old guys, is just, which is, I'm getting to that point now.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it taught me an enormous amount.
Yeah, no, that's great, mate. Tell us what it was like growing up in Perth in that era, I suppose, what you see now. Life was pretty simple then. I mean, tell us your family, your siblings and what you used to do.
Yeah, but coming from the Croatian background, we didn't have any real assimilation with Australian kids until we went to school, but outside, 9 to 3 at school, we didn't have friends or neighbours or hardly anything, although we knew a few of the kids in the street, but every weekend, every holiday, everything was consumed with our family only.
Okay.
And that was like my cousins, who, funnily enough, we're still very close today. So my first cousins are all very close, and we had spent our childhoods together. So that was a bit abnormal. And it wasn't until I was exposed to Aussie rules footy as a junior at about 12 or 13 that I realised that there was a whole pile of other kids in this area that I thought was, miles and miles out of the city, called Como, and I didn't think any kids lived there because then they were big 4,000 square metre blocks, like little farmlets.
Yeah, wow.
And it's all been developed since.
Hard to imagine.
There was pine trees everywhere and stuff like that. So, but then after that, the upbringing was very normal. Grew up with 3 sisters, all older than me, and. Yeah, it was great. Never had an argument within the family. We never had sickness, never had anything. It was just a perfect upbringing for me. But I was the youngest and the most spoiled, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Do you have a childhood memory that kind of shapes you, who you are now? Probably a tough question, but get you thinking.
Good question. Never been asked that. I remember being pissed off at my dad because he had no interest, what appeared to be no interest in my schooling, sport, anything. Now, he was working all the time, and being in the markets, you had to be up, at the fruit markets at 4 a.m, so he was up at 3.
Yeah.
And he worked 7 days a week. So if he wasn't at work, he was asleep. So that's why he didn't, and I didn't quite understand that as a kid. Never knew what schools we went to, never saw me swim a lap, never saw a game of footy.
It was that busy, he didn't know what school you went to.
Nah,
wow.
Just wasn't his thing, He said, "Oh, Mum will look after all that."
Yeah.
So, Mum was sort of there in a token capacity, but so I was probably pissed at that. And I think a lot of my anger as a teenager, probably, if I was to be analysed about it, and since I've thought about it in hindsight, I had no reason to be angry, but I was an angry kid, and Dad only taught me one thing, and that was how to fight. And he said, never have a long fight, but if you're going to hit someone, you hit them that hard that they don't get up. Which is classic bullying now. I mean, but then bullying was a core subject at school.
Yep.
So I became sadly one of those, and I thought it was okay because no one picked on me.
Yep.
If the child wasn't taught the process of learning and practiced it to quickly gain that information and process it.
Yep.
So that you could then get in the car and plan out where you're going to go on the map, which suburb you're going to go, so you can do it in some sort of sequence. So it logistically worked out all okay. That's what I wanted as an employer.
Yep.
And none of the kids could do it.
Yep.
And so when I went back as a guest speaker to Trinity College, to the Year 12 class, that was one of the messages that I said. It's not. Don't get frustrated with some of the real boring shit that the teachers are teaching you, because it's the process that you're trying to teach you. So it's not what you're learning; it's why.
Yep.
And that was the biggest bit of advice I could give them.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah.
That would have given you enormous pride to go back to your old school and stand in front of the students like that, and
funnily
go back
enough,
to the old days.
Before, in '98, I was asked to go to Aquinas and do it.
Okay.
Just as a local business person.
Mm.
And then I was quite rapt by it, because I was honoured that here's a dumbass kid that got thrown out, And about a week before the event, they contacted me and said, "Oh, listen, someone on the board found out that you got expelled from Trinity, and so we can't have you as the guest speaker. Really sorry."
Yeah.
And I said, fair enough. And I get it, I guess, from an unqualified perspective. If a guest speaker comes in, and this is sadly what lacks in education today, but if a guest speaker comes in and says the wrong thing, the school is then liable. So I get the liability side of it.
Yeah.
And it was probably because the funny thing was that if I'd played AFL, they'd have you in as a speaker because you won a flag or something.
Yeah.
It was one of the things that spurred me in the mid to late 90s to actually go and do something crazy like the English Channel. So I thought, well, if I do that, and then no one can ever disappoint me again like that. But it was after England, I think, it was, that Trinity then approached me and said, would you do this guest speaking gig? And I said, love to, but before we agree on it, you go back to your committee or whatever it is and remind them that I was expelled from the school, because I don't want someone to get upset about it, and then terminate it. So I said, okay, so let me know next week, or after the board met next. So they came back and the guy contacted me and he said, well, they've had the meeting. And I said, yeah, and what happened? And he said, they think it's fantastic. Badass kid makes good. So that was the theme behind it.
Yeah.
So it did go well.
That's good, mate. So you were saying your first job was a tiler.
Yeah.
And then obviously, in the brief before I read, you made a transition into real estate.
Yeah.
I think the year was about 1983. I think it was.
Yep.
You started in 76. So, how did that sort of come about? Was it a natural sort of thing that happened, or you kind of started getting more involved with it with your father, or how did it start out?
Excuse me. I did my apprenticeship, 1 year short, because we ended up getting into business together with the guy I was working for, and I was getting all the good jobs from my father's business.
Yep.
So we would just kept busy with all the jobs that we could make a lot of money out of. So we did that for a few years, and I'd made really good money out of it. And then Dad needed a manager at one of his stores in Mount Hawthorn, which I was about 19 or 20 at the time, and said, can you do that? And Dad only ever paid about half what the market rate was. So I did, and kept working on the Saturdays and Sundays by picking off the jobs that we would do. And in a tiling sense, we would do a 50 or 100 square metres floor on a Saturday and Sunday and get paid cash half the time. So I'd make triple on Saturday and Sunday than what I was doing Monday to Friday working for the old man.
Yep.
So it worked for a while, and then I realised that every tiler has got a bad back, like a lot of tradies, if you're doing heavy sort of labour work.
Yeah.
And so I thought this hasn't got long-term, dibs on it. So then I started looking at what can you earn the same amount of money. I think it was $50,000 a year I was earning at the time. What can you earn the same money in? And no one's going to pay a school dropout that sort of money. So then I met a guy who was a real estate agent through my brother-in-law, And he said, absolutely, we'll give you a job in sales.
Was this in the South Perth sort of
Yeah,
area?
in Como.
Where you grew up? Yep.
Roy Weston in Como.
Okay, yeah.
And the indication was that would get somewhere near what I was earning previously because it was commission-based. I couldn't take on a job that was just going to pay a straight wage.
Yep.
So, but what I hadn't bargained on is it took me 11 months before I sold my first property. That's how bad I was. Bad or probably pig-headed.
Okay.
Thinking, I know how to do it and I'll do it my way. I don't care anyone else what you have to do. So it took me pretty much 10 or 11 months to start to listen to people that had more experience and that I could appreciate what they were saying and then actually put it into practice. And then within 1 or 2 years, I was winning all the awards. But it took guidance from someone much older.
Oh, yeah, that often happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly in those formidable years. But as you know, mate, I mean, business is not easy, particularly when you're working for yourself. I've done it before and I understand the pitfalls. Everyone thinks it's Hollywood all the time and it's not always. But when things get tough, what drives you to, if things aren't going well, how do you go about that?
I mean, how I look at it now is different to how I used to.
Yeah.
Because I'm a bit wiser now.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And as you get older, it's probably not your own failings that have caused stress or things in your business, but it's often your kids that you're then trying to guide and mentor and support that generation.
Yep.
So, and I got 4 kids, so at different stages, they're all have their ups and downs. So, but back in the early days, it was Dad always said that when it's quiet, you just work harder. Mm-hmm. If your figures are 20% down on the next month, well, we just got to work 20% harder.
Yep.
So then it was, and it wasn't. We didn't have the science to be able to do it mathematically with computers and everything. It was just 20% meant that, if you were doing a 50-hour week, you got to do another 10 hours. Another 20%, and I finished up working 70 to 80 hours most weeks.
That's huge. It's a big week.
Yeah, and year after year to the point where my health suffered.
Yeah, you burnt yourself out of it.
Burnt myself out.
Yeah.
And still kept going to the point until a doctor pulled me in and said, you didn't take it seriously enough what I said. If it had have happened 10 years before, you'd be dead.
Wow. Okay.
So, because I just said, give me the medication, I'll do it, and kept working.
Right.
And so he called me back in and said, no, you need to change your lifestyle, change your social habits, change your eating habits, change your working life, change everything.
Yep.
And so overnight, and one of the things I did then, was I took my mobile number off my business card, which was unheard of.
Right. Okay.
Everyone thought I was mad.
Yep.
But how do you get hold of you? And what I hadn't realised that by everyone having your mobile number, it meant I didn't have a life because you had to take every call. Even if it was at midnight, doesn't matter. So when I stopped giving it out and I told the staff, I said, no, you only give it out to someone or I'll call them back,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's different these days, but back then that was the only way to take immediate control back.
Yeah.
And then structured my hours a lot better and got a lot more disciplined about the hours that I was doing and the quality hours I was doing.
Yeah.
And that was where the training came into it because I had to get healthy.
So it sounds like you're starting to get more of a work-life balance by then. You thought something's got to give.
Yeah.
And when the doctor hauled you in, were you still getting up early and, swimming in the morning at 4:40 or whatever? You were doing all that and then working a full 70-hour week. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the fitness probably kept you going.
Yeah, but I wasn't. I mean, I was. Being fit is one thing, but being unhealthy is another.
Yeah, yeah.
And particularly as a swimmer, you can get away with being quite big because you're hungry all the time.
Yeah.
and you're burning up a lot of calories, and so you're feeding it back in.
Yeah.
So it was a vicious cycle, and it took me a long time to realise that I had to burn more calories than what I was consuming, because I thought, as long as I train hard and just keep going every day, I can eat and drink what I want.
Yeah.
Well, as you get older, that doesn't work.
No.
And so something had to give in that regard.
Yeah.
And so I worked it out in my own way. And the training, that just becomes indoctrinated in you.
Yeah.
That how you start the day. And then now we look back on it, and one of the things that I pride myself on is my mental health.
Yeah.
But the training does that. There's a byproduct of that.
Yep.
Because, if you picked off anyone in the street and said, all right, you go and meditate for an hour and a half every morning, and you'd probably be in pretty good space if you did.
Yeah.
I just do it in the pool while I'm exercising. So
yeah, I'm the same. I think trying to have some sort of fitness every day, it does. It curbs that stress in your life, or I think you're a lot chilled out during the day. And it's funny you speak about mental health, because I know that's one of your passions, and it's one of mine as well when we talk about it. But I suppose in light of what's happened with the Selwood family, which has been absolutely downright awful, it's probably a good time to talk about it. What, mental health, particularly men's mental health.
Yeah, I mean, it's the hot topic at the minute.
Yeah,
and I was listening to some information on it today, and it's great that it's topical. You got to be very careful that it doesn't become too topical, and then there's not copycat type events occurring. So I've always had the belief that a lot of this stuff starts when kids are quite young.
Yeah.
Now, whether it's parenting or teaching, or in this day and age, social media, bullying, call it whatever you like.
Yeah.
And there's no one cause. It's a combination of things.
Yeah.
So I've had the long-term view that when kids get into primary school, I think the education system has an obligation to that child to actually do a mental health profile on each kid. Now, some could be totally fine, but sadly it's the kids that appear totally fine that might not be.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a system in place that I often thought it was, probably for year 7s and 8s upwards. But sadly, the problem goes back a lot deeper than that. So, and it's still the same today. You could have a kid who watched his father get murdered out the front at 8, that goes to a new school or in witness protection or whatever you like, and no one would ever know that this child saw his father murdered, with a gun or vicious stabbing or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But that kid carries that and suppresses it. Don't talk to anyone, don't tell anyone, because you're not allowed to.
Yeah.
So if there was a mental health profile done on that kid from where it started, from a certain age, then you're making the family, extended family aware. I mean, parents may or may not be still alive. It could have been an accident. It could have been anything that this kid was subject to. Once it's documented and the education system has it, as the kid goes through the school, then they are managed a bit more sensitively than what they might have been otherwise.
Yeah.
But this doesn't occur.
Yeah.
And if it did, the problems that are happening later in life, the mental health issues, you've got to go back to the root of the problem, which is probably when these kids are in primary school, sadly.
Yeah.
And put some dollars towards that part of it. There's no point having the medical system paying millions and millions or billions of dollars towards psychiatric and psychological assistance when the problem's already there. They're
Yeah.
just trying to
Yeah.
prepare it.
Yep.
Go back to the start and maybe help these kids get through to come out of it. It'll be a hell of a lot cheaper.
Yep.
It'll be a lot safer for these kids too.
Yeah.
So no one's picked it up. I spoke to Aquinas College about it, and I still don't believe they're doing it.
No.
So
Yeah.
that's one improvement that I'd certainly put in place.
Yeah. I think our era, if a family went through a tragedy or young kids and you see it, I think back then it probably wasn't even thought of. Okay, well, we've had the funeral, off you go to school, and we won't talk about it anymore. And that's the way it was done in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Which is, when you look at it now, it is quite brutal. And I think that's why there is a bit of an issue there. It's caught up later in our adult life. So, I mean, myself personally, I always, I think I've had the ability to see if a mate's not doing well, you generally pick it up and you have a bit of a chat with them, come on, let's go for a beer or whatever, and then they might start opening up more. And I'll say, well, thanks so much, I'm glad you did it. But no, mate, that's well described. On a different topic, AFL footy, you played.
Yep.
Wesley Curtin Footy Club.
Curtin Wesley, yep.
Great club.
Yeah, from when I was 16, 17, through to, and I still go and support each week now.
Yeah, good on you. Your son Sam plays, doesn't he? How'd you see the game then when you were playing, or when we were playing? It was a tough old game, let's be honest, and whatever went on the field happened on the field. How do you see it now, the modern game, as opposed to how it was then?
It's a different game.
It is.
Probably over sanitised for my liking in our era.
Yeah.
And it probably needs to change because it's gone too far in some of the aspects of it. I get the expansion of the game. Sydney and Gold Coast and Greater Western Sydney, that's arguably been successful now.
Yeah.
Not so sure Tasmania will be.
Why do you say that?
Oh, I don't know. They've got the population base, and whether or not the AFL can, does the expansion of the competition, if they do that, considering a third possible team in WA, they've always talked about one out of the NT. If you have that many teams, does it diminish the standards?
You're talking about diluting the competition.
Yeah, because you've got more people having a go.
Yeah.
Now, and I've got to wonder now where it's gone from, the skill side of it, probably not as high as it was because the athleticism now has to be part of it.
They're high-powered athletes now, that's what they are.
They are. And the injuries, these guys that are 100-odd kilos or 95 kilos and they can run 100 metres in 11 seconds or 12 seconds or something, hitting contests and the impact that has, it's no wonder there's injuries. I was talking to someone involved in rugby league only a week or so ago.
Yep.
And I don't understand how there's not more injuries in rugby league. They pretty much run in straight lines, but they hit severely hard.
Oh, yeah.
And okay, I get they're probably built a bit differently, and it's probably a bit slower for some of them, and the pitches are actually a little bit softer, in the sense that they don't cut the grass quite so sharp.
Yeah.
But there should be more head injuries, and whether that hasn't come out yet, or I think it is. I think Molly Lewis might have a few problems and a few others.
Yeah.
But then you look at, well, what's the difference between that and you draw a comparison to AFL? Well, if you look at the amount of interchanges that occur, so you got fresh guys running on and barreling into someone who's been out there for 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think decreasing the amount of rotations might help to slow it down.
Yeah.
Decreasing the squad sizes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you're actually leaving guys out there for longer.
Yeah.
So they're not then playing at their optimum, but the other side isn't either.
Yeah.
So it would slow the game down.
Yeah.
And if they're serious about the injuries, But the AFL probably aren't because it means more kids get on the squad.
I don't think I've ever seen a sport where, in the world, in an elite capacity, where they change the rules every 5 minutes. I don't know any other sport, correct me if I'm wrong, but...
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's been the problem with the umpiring because they're confused half the time. I think there's too many umpires on the field.
Yeah, totally.
As far as the AFL is concerned, concussion, that's another big topic as well. I actually have bumped into John Platten a few times in Adelaide, and he's a great guy. He's always up for a chat. And I did ask him once how he was going. He said, "Oh, mate, look, we'll have my good days and bad days."
Well, he's part of the class action, I believe.
He is, yeah. And he, I think, over his career, he was concussed 30-odd times or something. And that's just way too many. Yeah. So that's why I think the AFL have got this protocol going on now.
It's a little bit like the education system. They need to go back and have a player profile done from juniors.
Yep.
Because if a kid gets knocked out 10 times in juniors, that's not going to come up.
Yeah.
That should all be part of it. I've got a son playing. If he got knocked out 3 times, the 3 times would be it for me.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be calling it.
Would you? Yeah. Now that we know what we know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mate, when we had lunch at the Windsor Hotel, you told some fantastic stories, 2 or 3 good ones.
The rest weren't.
Well, maybe some can't be repeated.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Hit us with them in no particular order.
Yeah. And there was some I even forgot about that I didn't mention that I thought of since.
So this could be off the cuff as well.
Yeah. Probably there's a couple that are up there, and the Chopper Reed one was probably is that the one you want me to talk about?
Yep.
Yeah. Was probably one of the most bizarre.
Yep.
So I'll set the scene. At the time, I'd done a fair bit with sports guys about public speaking.
And just on that, I did say, how come you seem to know every bastard in sport, or how the hell does that come about? Never met a bloke that seems to know everyone.
I've never taken a backward step to go and introduce myself for a start.
Yeah, no, you don't lack confidence.
And so whenever the opportunity was there, and quite often, a lot of these guys, and probably not so much these days, but back in our day, some of them are quite anxious about, what the limelight they've been thrown into.
Right.
So you'd see them at a function or at a footy camp thing or whatever, and they'd sort of be on their own. And I'd be the first one that would go and say, "Hey, how you going?" and put them at ease and just have a chat.
Yeah.
And great people, and a lot of these relationships, I've just stayed in touch with the good people that you always would, So they've done favours for me, and vice versa.
Yeah, good.
So that's probably the longevity of it. Why I know so many, I don't know. We just moved in those circles. We did a lot with variety clubs, so we got to know a lot of the sports guys that came and supported.
Yep, makes sense.
Was social, and there was nothing in it for me, but they had a great night, and so got to know a lot of them. So I was never backward in coming forward in that regard. Getting back to Chopper, he was doing a talk at some nondescript pub somewhere, and there was about 100-odd people, mixed crowd, and he did his talk, which was fucking brutal. He would describe the brutality of some of the things that he did, which, that was the guy, and that was what he was known for. And I'm sitting back thinking, gee, if he actually cleaned this up, he'd really have something that he could talk about. And if he highlighted the best bits and probably downplayed the worst bits, and respected the fact that there's females in the audience as well, not everyone wants to hear that.
Yeah.
So I sort of felt for him on that side, and he just missed the mark because a guy like Chopper was uncoachable because of his character. No one would go and meet him because they'd be too intimidated by him. No one would dare criticise him and say, "Listen, you're doing this wrong. You need to do this," because he'd belt you.
Too scared of him.
Yeah, that's right. So, but, I had the protection of, 100 people. I was just in the audience. And so he said at the end of his thing, he says, has anyone got any freaking questions? So, as if to say, I don't want you to ask them, but that was how it came across.
Yeah.
And I sort of waited, and his hand goes up.
Someone Sardelic, yep, I got one.
The wife at the time belting me under the table, what are you doing, type thing. And so I said, yeah, I've got a couple of questions, and I started rattling a few off. It ended up being about 11 or 12 in sequence, one after the other. And whilst it was very entertaining, because I was giving him a bit like throwing a fishing line out and letting him grab onto it and just see where it would go, because his mind was pretty out there. So, and some of the questions, I can't repeat them now in sequence, but the interesting thing was that, and I actually knew that he has got some intellect, and which I found out later. So I asked him, I said, so one of the questions was, so you've got a son. What advice do you give to your son now about, your life, or if your son ever asked, how did you succeed in life, and what do you suggest I do? What would you say to him?
Yeah.
And which I thought was a pretty good question.
Wow, yeah.
And
that.
and he said, I wouldn't tell him to go down into the industry that I went into, along those lines, which was, an expected answer, but it put him on the spot.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a rehearsed answer for it.
Yeah, okay.
I asked him if he had any regrets, thinking that he might have come back and said, well, I probably could have been a better father to my kids, or...
Yeah.
But his only regret was that he was placed in the solitary confinement area with Martin Bryant.
Right,
to do him in. And that was the word he used, whether that means beating him up or killing him.
Be anything.
Yeah. But Martin Bryant was in isolation, as was Chopper, and they put him in the same exercise yard. Only the two of them. And so Chopper could do his thing. And his only regret was that he didn't. He just had an off day. I said, how come? And he said, I just had an off day. I didn't feel like it. And I said, okay. But that was his only regret, which surprised me.
Yeah.
But he only ever maintained that he only killed someone that deserved to be killed. He didn't admit to all of them. He admitted to 4 in his final interview before he died. But he wouldn't admit to any of the others, which he was incarcerated for.
Yeah.
So I asked him about the pain associated when he had his ears cut off. Yeah. And his answer was quite funny. And that could have been theatrical, more theatrical when he was explaining the answer. Apparently his ears still moved on the floor after it hit.
Oh, God.
But then I asked him about the pain, and I asked him, and at this point he was getting pretty pissed off. We're about question 7 or something. Yeah. And he said, what are you, back in Juno or something? No, I'm not.
And everyone looks at you,
you? And everyone's saying, keep going.
Yeah.
Great, it made the night,
Yeah.
And I said, were you ever tested, for, that there's this thing that, like, some kids don't feel pain and they can walk on a hot barbecue and shit like that.
Yeah.
He was tested for that. And he said they reckon there was a part of his brain missing where he didn't feel normal pain. Still felt pain, but not like you and I would.
No.
So he was tested in that regard. So
yeah.
But it was a really interesting character.
Yeah,
it's a pity that he didn't get managed in that regard, because he could have done a lot of good for society had he have channeled his energy in the right way and really sold himself. Yeah, and generated, raised funds for charities and things like that. Yeah. But he was just, and I was asked to go and meet with him. Yeah. well, only a week or so later. And I thought about it, and I elected not to.
Yeah.
Because there was just no upside for me.
Mm.
And if I'm just going to help this guy, and, it'd probably be a bit of an experience, but I didn't want, someone to take a picture and say, what's the local South Perth real estate agent doing?
Yeah.
Having lunch with Jobber Reid. So
you got to be a bit careful, haven't you? Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's a good story, mate. Jeff Marsh used to play for Australia, Swampy.
Yep.
I was lucky enough to meet him when I was 12 years old at Adelaide Oval. He signed a bat for me. I thought he was a really nice man then. And then met him through a mutual mate of ours, Keno, at the North Melbourne scene. Always a good guy to chat. Don't know him like you do. You've got a good story about him as well when he retired.
Yeah, after he retired, he was not in a great mental health space after the passing of a good mate. And so he gave up on the coaching job, and I think at the time he'd bought a paper round and was just throwing papers. This was like months after winning the World Cup. And
that's so different, isn't it?
Yeah, so he was being approached by everyone to get him to speak publicly, and being offered a lot of money for it. And the bottom line was that wasn't his thing. He could certainly play cricket and coach, but at public speaking, he used to get Steve Water to do all the media stuff. So he got recommended through a friend to talk to me about it, because I'd done a little bit of it at the time, and he just needed to quickly get up to speed.
Yeah.
And he'd inquired himself and spoke to a few different people, and he was going to go and do a 5-week course and pay a ridiculous amount of money for it. And the information I got back was that it would have taken his personality away. And that's not what needed to happen, because everyone loves Swampy because of the sort of personality he is.
Yeah.
And so that needed to be retained. So we did some work with the group in a one-day session at the Wacker, just Swamp, myself and this other guy, and basically built his story, from his school days through to the World Cup, and how he achieved what he achieved, and it worked. And he was out on the speaking circuit for a while, and he can still do it, because you get taught the basics, principles of it that you can apply for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So it was golden edge stuff that I was really thankful to be a part of.
Yeah. It's like anything, if you keep doing something, you get better at it, don't you?
Yeah,
you feel more comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that you've got a fascination of crime and crime stories and that sort of stuff. You're in Bali at one time, and you talked your way into the prison.
I bribed my way into
very interesting story, mate. Tell the audience about that.
Naively, I thought that they'd have a public area that you could just, when all the crims are locked up, that you could just have because, in Bali they're fairly commercial and you make money out of anything.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, when the, communal area is not occupied, they might do a tour.
Yep.
And so I went and asked, and they said, no one's allowed in. And so, cut a long story short, I said, there's got to be a way in. And, I got around it by bribing the guy at the guard, and gave him another $50 or something to bribe the next person.
Yep.
Who would get a prisoner that would accept you as a visitor, because that's the only way you can get in. So you got to know someone in there, and I didn't know anyone, apart from the high-profile ones like Chappelle Corby and the Bali Nine and those that were in there at the time. So anyway, so they got what they called, I think they call him a custodian, who's a trusted prisoner that sort of does a bit of work for the guards and stuff. And said, listen, we got this guy from Perth. He's not a journo, he's not a lawyer, he's not a cop. He just wants to go and have a chat. And we think we can trust him, and seems okay. And I took one of my daughter's friends with me to add to it, and she was interested as well. So we went in and we went through the process, and I thought it was just going to be like all the movies you see where, you've got a table like this and the glass in between, and you get the phone and you talk to the guy and that's it.
Bit like one of those Hollywood movies or whatever.
Yeah, it's not like that at all.
No.
So they process you through all these like jail doors into these different rooms, and they take all your jewelry, belt, money. I did slip $50 into my shoe in case I needed it, and passport, ID, everything is taken and locked away.
Yeah.
And this guard was taking me through, and all the guards have got like AK-47 type guns.
Yeah, they don't muck around.
No, and where he was taking me, we could see through this mesh thing in the door where it was like a communal area, and there would have been 100 crims there, and they said, right, well, that's where you're going.
Yep.
I said, that's kind of not what I thought. How does it work? I said, where are you going to be? He said, I'll be watching you the whole time. I said, I've got to see where you are. So if I'm sitting here, you need to be there in case something, if a riot breaks
goes down or whatever.
Yeah. So he said, no, I'll be watching you the whole time. So that was okay. And you had like 30 seconds to make your mind up. Well, yeah, now we're going.
Yep.
So 100 crims plus visitors, and it's 2 foot by 2 foot concrete slabs you're sitting on, like cement slabs, and steel Colorbond roof, hot as hell, and the prisoner's got a straw mat which is about 1.2 metres by 1.2 metres, and you've got to sit on the floor on the mat,
right?
And that's your spot. And so the next prisoner's there, and Chappelle was from Jake to me away with her visitors.
Yep.
The Barley Nine were like on that wall there.
Unbelievable.
They didn't have a lot of business. But, so I sat with this kid for about an hour.
Yep.
And when I say kid, he was probably 23 or 24. He got 3 years for 3 ecstasy pills he had. It was a setup. He got...
was he like a local?
No, he was from Java.
Java.
But he had a girlfriend who was Balinese, and they'd split up, and then she thought she'll get him back.
Yeah, okay.
And
bit of revenge.
Told the cops, paid them off. They planted some drugs on him. 3 years, no questions asked. But, and I got to say, it was probably one of the most interesting one-on-ones I'd ever had because of what we knew of the prison and the how bad it was. And he explained, he said, I've got nothing to hide, but I'm telling you, it's not that bad. I know what you guys see in the media, and it's not that bad. Some parts of it are bad. We are like any community. We have murders and rapes and all that stuff, same as any small community, or large community. But there's a fair degree of assistance we get. Yes, the conditions are terrible, but you learn to live with that because you're in prison. The food is terrible.
Yep.
But they have a Western canteen and then the local food. Local food, he said, is hideous.
Yeah.
But $50 would have fed him 3 meals a day in the Western canteen for a month.
Yep.
So very appreciative of that. He had a job in there. He played in the band in there. Every Saturday night they played to the Crims. And he said if it wasn't for his 3 years of incarceration, he wouldn't be where he is now. I mean, you're still in there, but he totally turned his life around.
That's good.
From being a drug user, low-level drug dealer, and that was all he was ever going to be, to cleaning his act up. He got a university degree while studying in there.
That's good.
And had aspirations when he got out. And
yeah.
So, it was interesting.
I still can't believe you did that, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't either.
Yeah. When you told me over lunch, I thought, wow.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the house story?
Which one?
The auction one.
Oh, yeah.
Can we go there?
Yeah. We're at lunch that year, a couple of months after it happened. 3 or 4 real estate agents I know was having lunch, and the question came up, so what's the most bizarre thing that's ever happened?
Yeah.
And we went around the table, and I was last because I sort of knew mine might win it.
Yeah. Well, I think it would.
Yeah. And, and a few of them had which I haven't. One of my staff has, where you've gone to do an inspection and someone's hanging in the shower or someone's died of an overdose and all that sort of thing. That's sadly not uncommon in our industry over the years. So this particular day we were selling this house, and to protect people, I won't say suburbs or names, we were selling this house. It was local, and we'd opened it 3 or 4 times, and each time the person would take a dog for a walk and give us the hour that we need and so on. And the house was immaculate. It was great.
Yeah.
The particular person was renting off us at the time. And so the auction was due at 11 o'clock, and we got there about 10:15. And there was no answer at the door. Rang her, no answer. Had a key, got in the back door, and the place was like a bomb's hit it.
Yeah.
It's like there's a massive party the night before, but there was no one there. There was just shit everywhere. So I had Hammond, my assistant at the time, he was with me. I said, mate, start cleaning it up. And you start at the back, I'll start at the front.
Yeah.
So I went to the front, and the bedroom door was shut. So I thought, maybe she's just still in bed.
Yep.
Knock on the door.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Kept knocking, nothing. Opened the door, and she's still in bed.
Yep.
I thought, asleep. Come on, grab the feet. Come on, wake up. Nothing. Check vital signs. No signs of life. So I thought, So,
Jeez.
and I've got, probably 60 or 70 people rocking up in the next half an hour, progressively.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, there's an ambulance station down the road. I'll ring the ambulance and get them to come and take her out. So as soon as I rang the ambulance, they said, right, get her off the bed. Yeah, but I said, I've checked all vital signs, check it again. Nothing.
Yep.
Took her off the bed because you can't do CPR on the bed.
No.
You need a hard surface. Put her on the floor. She said, right, can you put the phone on loudspeaker, put it on the floor, can you do CPR? And I'd been trained and all that.
Yep.
I said, yeah, I can. So we started doing that, and she said, keep going. I said, there's nothing here. And she said, just keep going. The ambulance is on the way. And that was probably 5 minutes. It seemed like longer.
Yeah.
She said, keep going. Have you got anyone else who can take over? I said, no. I said, I'll do it. I'll just keep fine. So keep going. And after it was probably about 4.5 minutes, she said, is anything changing? And one of her eyelids just started to move. I didn't know whether that was because of the pressure or what, but the eyelid's floated. She said, perfect, keep going. And then all of a sudden there was this massive gasp of air as she opened her mouth, and she's back.
Yeah.
And she's looking starry-eyed at me.
Wow.
As the ambulance guys rocked up with the gurney. So they came, they took over, and then all these people are rocking up. Ambos are wheeling this poor girl out. And the good news is that we sold it under the hammer about 15 minutes later. So
this all happened within an afternoon. Unbelievable.
Saved a life and made a commission same morning.
Yeah.
So it was pretty amazing. But to this day, I don't think she would have even known because of the condition that she was in, that she'd been brought back.
Yeah. So she never thanked you for it? Or?
No. In fact, quite the opposite.
Unbelievable.
I think she was in a pretty bad place, reading some of the items that were laying around the place, and so maybe she may have wanted to succeed rather than being brought back. So maybe wasn't that happy with it. But
yeah.
No, I never got a thank you, and
that's unbelievable, mate.
Yeah.
Can we talk about your immediate family, your own family?
Sure.
Yeah, I know you're a very proud family man. Talk about your children.
4 kids, 3 girls and a boy.
Yeah.
Had the 3 girls very young. First one at 22.
Yep.
And when I was 22. So she's now 42, 43 this year.
Mm-hmm.
Then 2 girls after that as well. They're only 13 months apart, so they were pretty much like twins.
Yeah, okay.
And then we stopped having kids.
Yep.
And then 12 years later, my son was born. So that was, a real blessing. So And, like all kids, the funny thing was when they were growing up, I was a try-hard athlete because I was never home. I was working all the time and then training.
Yep.
So, and I think they missed out on a bit because of that. Certainly the girls did. So I had a few issues as a result of that.
Okay.
To this day, they're all great now, and we've got the best relationship ever.
That's good.
There was a bit of resentment when the marriage breakdown occurred.
Yeah.
But I'd kind of waited a long time for that so I could explain it to my son. He was 14 at the time. So that was difficult, and kids can hide a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You don't realise till later.
Yeah.
So that was certainly a journey.
Yeah.
That needed a lot. And I think I could break up my fathering into probably non-existent for the girls for the first 15, 20 years. Then became a lot more attentive with my son because I was just a bit older and probably had a bit more time. And then because I was relatively young when I had them, our relationship now is really solid because I sort of grew up with them.
Yeah.
And I've gone through the 3 or 4 phases of parenting or maturity that has made me a very different person and what I hope and believe that I'm a much better person than what I was back then, because my single focus was work and succeed no matter what.
Yeah.
And didn't matter about too much else in life, which was the gift I got from my father.
Yeah, you're saying that.
Yeah, so it gave me the resilience that I inherited from him.
Yeah.
Which has been really handy throughout life.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm teaching my kids the same sort of things as they become older.
Yep.
Because you've got to be old enough, mature enough to receive and understand it.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that in just about every day, in the little things that they're finally getting. But as a father, you kind of, I think one of the main difference was, I remember every question I ever asked my mum and dad, and maybe it was affordability at the time, but the answer was no.
Yep.
Can I go to Justin's place? No. Why not? Just no.
Yep.
And so my parenting was, I'm never going to say no. I'm always going to say, well, yeah, probably, but let's negotiate a fair outcome.
Yeah. Yep.
So as a professional negotiator, they wanted to go to the Royal Show and waste money, whereas I'd negotiate an outcome and pay them not to go.
Right. Okay. Okay.
$50 each was cheaper than going to the show, and
it would have been
Royal Show as an example.
Yeah.
Try and arrive at a better position that's going to give them, a better and more mature outcome at the end of it, rather than just give them everything all the time, which as parents in this era, we overcompensate.
Yep.
And we buy them good cars and we make sure they're safe and we try and protect them.
Yep.
But there's a bit in that where they're possibly missing on some of the skills in life that you need to get.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't subscribe to, treat them mean to keep them keen and all that sort of thing. I think parenting is very different.
Yep.
The information and access that not only we've got these days, but the kids have got to navigate the way through their problems. You could work together, and fortunately, I've got enough good contacts that are part of my team that if ever the kids need help, I've got professional people that are there to do it. So
no, that's good.
Yeah, it's different as I've gotten older. Sort of every 10 years, you get a little bit more wisdom that you can pass on.
Yeah. So with your business, Sardelic Real Estate, do any of the kids actually work in the business these days?
Yep. The eldest daughter, Bianca, she pretty much runs it.
Okay.
And my son, who's the youngest, he's 25 next month.
Yeah.
He's been involved now for 4 or 5 years.
Mm.
Keen as mustard, learning heaps. So the two of them are pretty much, between the three of us, we're a really good team, whereas I've got all the contacts and they do the grunt work. So,
Yep.
excuse me. Yeah, so, and that's been running really well. We set up a cafe in South Perth on Angelo Street that we base ourselves out of there.
Yep.
And I'm in there for 2 or 3 hours a day.
Yep.
When I can, and the rest I work from home, as do the kids and all the other staff, which run the management side of the business and all that. So the business has never changed. We got to a certain size, and then we just outsourced a lot of things.
It's the way to go these days, really, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's a modern way of
It is.
business.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Just we're talking about real estate again.
Yeah.
We covered it before, but what are the misconceptions that you think people often have about the industry?
Real estate agents are never highly regarded, and justifiably so. And which is sad, because there's a lot of good people in it, but there's a veil cast over us that, you know, they're all assholes and they drive nice cars and wear nice clothes and, you know, make all this money and don't really care. There's a fair bit of truth to it, unfortunately, and when you look at it on face value, the public perception I can understand fully, because you know what the public sees, particularly in a strong market. If you're selling a house for $1 million, what the public sees is property gets listed, 3 to 7 days later it's under contract, and the agent's walked away with $20,000 to $25,000 in commission. It's a shitload of money.
That's a big whack in my head.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so immediately, and this is why the perception is not great, immediately people think, well, they're doing that. And some agents are doing that 5 to 10 times a month.
Gee whiz.
So we're not. But, you know, ours is a bit more measured and so on. But the perception is that any industry has to perceive good value for money to get a good reputation, right? So we get thrown in the same league as lawyers and car salesmen and people who have the ability to earn a lot of money, because it doesn't always appear to be good bang for your buck, and understandably so. So I think the industry has got a bit of cleaning up to do in that regard.
Okay.
But if they probably listen to more, and I think it comes down to the education and training of people coming into it, and sometimes the wrong people going into it with this perception that they're going to get to that level. Yeah, it doesn't. Not everyone gets to that level, and it doesn't happen overnight.
That's a lot of hard work.
Oh,
too.
Totally. And I would get a call a month from someone, saying, "Hey, my kid or my mate or my wife or someone is thinking about getting into the industry. Would you talk to them?" And totally, I would. I say, you get them to call me. Yep. Don't you set it up. I want them to call me. So that gets rid of half of them because they don't.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure why, but whether that's an intimidation thing or they're possibly not that serious.
Yep.
So that's how I break it down. The ones that do, I'll give them as much time as they need.
Because you're passionate about the industry.
Yeah, and be brutally honest.
Yep.
Whether I think they've got the skills to or not. So once I get their resume, find out a bit about them, and find out if they've got what I think it takes. Because sadly, not everyone does, but it's the ones that probably don't that pretend that they try and pretend that they can get there, and that's when the bullshit factor comes in. So they'll start lying to clients, start lying to buyers, start lying to whoever, because they get desperate for a deal.
Okay.
And in this market, you don't have to be too desperate, but they get desperate to get the stock, which is the listings that they need.
Yeah, yeah.
So that makes it understandable why the reputation is not that good. On the flip side, if you look at it positively and say, and categorically, it is the best job in the world, because if you're in the right space, it's easy. It's not taxing. It's getting a bit taxing because there's a bit more to it these days. But if you're not in a difficult area or in difficult space, by that I mean possibly, something that was, a bit of a legal minefield. If you're just selling houses on green title lots, it's pretty simple. And if that's the space you wanted to be in. But the first question I generally ask people was, well, how much are you earning now and how much do you think you're going to earn or how much do you want to earn or what's your worth? Mm-hmm. And if someone turns around and says, well, I reckon I should be earning $500,000 a year and you're only earning 70 now, well, there's the first problem because I don't know that many agents that are earning $500,000 a year unless they've got the ability to work unbelievable hours or pay people behind them to be in their team.
Yep.
Now, I know agents that are earning millions a year, but that's a vastly different kettle of fish. So people often have the wrong perception. So I just tell them honestly, this is how it's going to roll. This is what you should be doing for your first year.
Yep.
And you should be educating yourself and getting trained by the right people and getting with the right group that can give you what you're going to need, because it's going to take a year or two before you get to the point where, the person you see driving down in the BMW and the nice clothes, earning good money, it's going to take a while to get there. And it's market driven as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
The last few years have been a great time to be in because Blind Freddie could have sold something.
Yeah.
But when this stops, then you could lose 60 or 70% of the industry.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to do it in a hard market.
No, that's the difference.
So there's a fair bit to it.
Yep.
And we don't want to turn this into a real estate
interview. No. But just on that, you were saying it takes a good 12 months to get into it. Way back in 1983, you're working, right?
Mm.
Can you remember the first house that you ever sold and how did you feel?
Yeah. 14 Crocus Way, Ferndale.
Oh, you can remember it.
Mrs. Fowle owned it, and I did a conjunction with a guy called Dennis Murray.
Wow, okay. Yeah, it would have been exciting. You think, Biddy, I'm on my way.
Well, no, because it took 11 months to get there.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny I can just rattle that off. I mean, because it was my first, but
yeah, after all those years,
there's a lot that I can still rattle off as you get older, and particularly as you go on cholesterol-lowering medication. You tend to forget some shit.
Yes.
So that does make it a bit harder.
Yeah.
And my old man had the ability to. I had an ability to, and still have to a degree. If I sold your house 30 years ago and bumped into you and you still owned it and you said, hey, that house that I bought in Canning Vale, what do you reckon it's worth? And I ask you if you've changed it and you go, no, it's actually still the same. I can sit there and draw you the floor plan of the house from 30 years ago. Now, that's just bizarre.
It is,
but it's one of the things that I've been blessed with.
Photographic memory, almost.
Well, it was, and then I think, as you get older and as you hit certain hurdles in life, you tend to lose it. Yeah. But I believe it comes back.
Yep.
And I'm in that sort of space now, where I had a period of my life which was probably 5 or 6 years, that I didn't have that mental clarity.
Yep.
But I'm now pretty much on my game where, I've got that ability now. But I'm doing things a little bit more selectively than what I used to, and I'm not sort of pounding on doors.
No.
Like you would in the old days.
No, it's different now. Mate, if you could give some advice, what you know now to your younger self, what would that be?
Well, like everyone, I think when we got to 20, we thought we just knew it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in my 60s and I still don't know it all.
No.
So you never stop learning.
No.
So the advice I'd be giving is always continue to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Never react to the problem without thinking it through first. And then before you do, you think outside the square.
Yep.
And I learnt a lot of this from a partner who I had in work, Jared Eaton, who's not with us anymore in a business sense. But he had this amazing ability there's a really deep thinker and think outside the square. And I didn't realise it until probably a couple of years after he left, that I learnt a lot of that from him just through working with him day in, day out.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think a lot of people just look at the face value of a problem without, a bit like a layer of an onion where you peel it all back and crack it open and then look at it. Now, whether it's a complex set of numbers or a complex valuation or a complex contract or something, it's easier to say, oh, no, I can't do that, or ask ChatGPT or AI or whatever it is. But, we're not from that world, so we kind of had to work it out.
Yep.
These days, I got a lot of good people around me I can get advice from. But
Mate, I don't know if you're a reader or not. I never asked you that, but it's a book you've read or, an interesting person that you've met along the way that's had an influence on you and, has significantly changed your whole way of thinking at some point in your life?
I got through my whole school life without reading a book, except bar one, which was about year 9. And it was written by a guy called Jack London. It was called Call of the Wild. I don't know why I remember it, but...
I've heard of that book. I haven't read it.
Yeah. About some Alaskan mountain dogs or something.
Yep.
And I read another one while I was at school, actually, called by Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was about, but it was only small, so I read it because it was part of an English thing. And then I didn't read until I was then went to my first seminar when I was tiling, actually, or working for the old man. Excuse me, and someone couldn't make it, so I went. And thankfully that was by a guy from Kalgoorlie called Dr. Joe Brasich.
Yeah.
He was a body language expert, wrote many books. He sadly passed away in recent years. But that taught me so much about negotiating and reading the play in life more than anything about, when people, it's the silent language, isn't it? But what they're saying and what they're doing without actually saying anything.
Yeah.
So that was probably the most influential. Then I read The Power of One, which was by Boris Courtney. But then I read Awaken the Giant Within by Anthony Robbins. Life-changing.
Right.
Now, he runs seminars and he's a guru and he's the guy that should be running the United States. But
right.
And I still listen to some of his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so positive and, it's all about motivation and getting the best out of yourself. And all that
Can-do attitude all the time.
Yeah, but and it was probably around the time, he works on basically people reprogramming their minds.
Yep.
A name for it, I can't remember what it's called. But that's what his whole thing is. And I think I happened to hear him and read his book that made me realise that, I probably needed to do a reset.
Yeah,
And he gave me the tools to show me how to do it.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so it was, life-changing.
Yeah.
And once I read that, now there's audio books and stuff like that. And if I wanted to read something, I'd probably go an audio book or I'd listen to his stuff. It's a bit easier and I got more time for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you weren't doing what you're doing now, what do you think you'd be doing?
Probably radio.
I had a feeling you might say that.
But
we did say that before.
I don't know that I'd be any good at anything else. Like, I'm really good at what I do. I don't mind saying that.
No, you are.
But to really enjoy it, you just got to be naturally good at it.
I think so.
And I don't think there'd be anything else that I'd be that good at.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't enjoy it as much. So I think I'm in the perfect position and industry for what I do.
Yep.
And it's a bit like a volume control. You can turn it up as high as you like and go as hard as you like.
Yep.
Or you can turn it back and just now as an older agent, I can pick off what I want to do and deal with who I want to deal with rather than before you had to go out and just deal with everyone because that was the only option.
Yep.
So,
what's the one thing in life that you just cannot live without?
My kids, my current partner.
Yep.
I shouldn't say current because we're engaged to be married. But,
understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, she's been life-changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, as have my kids. They've all been incredible. So I couldn't live without them. I couldn't live without water. I have to swim.
Yeah.
I'm peeling my way back, by dropping 2 days a week. But I really had to think about that. That was an effort for me to do 2 days of gym rather than
Okay.
5 days in the water. So
Yeah.
if I holiday, it's got to be near water.
Yeah. So you like the ocean? You swim the ocean?
Ocean. Not so much ocean now because after we did England, we did all the ocean. We were doing, I don't know, 30, 40 Ks a week in the ocean.
Yeah.
And then a few shark attacks happened. And so,
well, that's always a bit scary, isn't it?
It is.
Bit of a deterrent. Yeah. Mate, what's the next chapter for you?
I do know. I don't have to think about that. I've probably got a 3-year to 5-year period that I'm looking at going through the I've just had a change to restructure and all that. The kids are pretty close to getting ready to step up, I'd say. So I'll continue as I am for the next 3 years, and then between the 3rd and the 5th year, I'll drop it back, but still be involved in a capacity where I still get paid for my time and so on. And I'll probably be like that, hopefully, if I'm mentally still right, for another 10 years.
Yep. No, fantastic.
Yeah.
Mate, just to close, if you could leave one thing with our listeners and viewers, what would you say to challenge themselves? What would that be? How can they challenge themselves?
I think you've got to start with a good team around you, because it's fine for anyone to say, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to climb Mount Everest or, swim to Rottnest and all that sort of stuff. You can't do it without support.
No.
So you, whatever you do, you got to line up what's my support team that's going to back me in this challenge. Now, whether that's physical or mental or academic or professional, whatever it is, you still need support. You got to have a supportive partner. You got to have understanding kids, because it's I believe whatever anyone does, you've got to understand that challenges will come, and what I tend to do is analyse the size of the challenge. So you set your goal, whatever that might be, and then one of your kids gets sick, or you get sick, or your parents are sick, and we all go through these different phases as we get older. So I analyse the degree of the challenge or the hurdle that I've hit.
Yep.
And say, okay, if it's a relationship bust up initially, that could be 100%. After the 2nd or 3rd week, it's probably 80%.
Yep.
Then after the 2nd or 3rd month, it's probably down to 50%. So this is 50% of your working day.
Yep.
Is going just on that. So that's not very productive, but that's your mental space. That's the time that you're having a beer with your mates and you're talking about it, and that's dealing with your lawyers, and you're dealing with the ex, and you're dealing with the kids and all that. That percentage, it comes down the longer it takes. So if one of your kids gets sick, well, that's depending on how sick they are, that could be anywhere from a 20% to a 50% if your working day is going to go on that.
Yep.
If you've got a legal case, that could be 50% of your working time. So once you know what the problem is and how much time you can put to it, and many years ago we had a legal issue, and it was going to take 20 to 25% of my time.
Yep.
Sleep time, wake time, work time.
Yep.
Social time, 25%.
Yeah.
So at the time I was doing 10 hours a day in the office, and starting at 7 a.m, and I needed to find another 2.5 hours a day to deal with that issue.
Yeah.
So I started 2.5 hours earlier.
Yeah.
So I was up at 3 or 4.
Yeah.
To be able to deal with that. But then I had the discipline to deal with it by 7 a.m, and then I was back, and I closed the file, and I didn't open it again until 5 the next morning or 4:30 the next morning. Mm-hmm. Same as when I studied later in life. I worked out how to study and applied myself.
Yep.
But I had to do that at between 5 and 7 in the morning, so I could still function and earn an income and do all that. So It's about categorizing and putting things in their baskets so that you can then continue your working life and continue your life without it having an effect.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if if a tragedy hits or someone close to you is very sick, you're in boots and all. You've got to go and help that person.
Yeah.
But you've got to strategize it so that your working life can handle it, and you can mentally handle it so that you don't burn out in the process because of it, no matter what the challenge is. So get your foundation right before you set your own challenge, and then choose a challenge that's achievable as well.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse than not hitting your goal.
No, that's right.
But they say aim big, but it's also got to be achievable too.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
Simmon, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate, to have you as a guest.
It's been great talking.
And I think I've always found you inspirational, known each other a long time, but I appreciate being on the TheCleggCast.
Thanks very much, mate. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, mate. Well done.
Duh.
Is that all right?